Greetings and warm welcome to the final day of this global cyber conclave titled Cybersphere C3D 2020 Data Digital Diplomacy, organized by Tillotoma Foundation. This mega event has been going on from the 9th December to 12th December 2020. The objective of the event is to discuss issues of threats to national security through cyber means, cyber terrorism, innovations in data security and cyber security, digital diplomacy, digital propaganda, communications technology, and digital solutions for different sectors like education, business, etc. in the post-pandemic scenario. Tillotoma Foundation is a global organization working in the areas of international relations, financial, environmental, scientific, strategic, and defense policy. On the first session of day 4 of this conclave, I am pleased to present the special lecture on information and cyber warfare, threats to national security by Major General Dr. Bipin Bakshi, VSM, Deputy Director General, Manohar Parrikar, Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. Major General Bakshi has wide experience across operations, training, and cyber or information warfare with 5 years in the Parachute Brigade and over 2.5 years in the National Security Guard. He has a PhD on information warfare. He is a winner of the Sword of Honor and Gold Medal from IMA Dehradun on commissioning in 1982. He was also awarded the Gold Medal at College of Military Engineering for the B.Tech course and has later attended prestigious courses including National Defense College course. He is a recipient of Vishisht Seva Medal in 2004 for his service in the Kargil sector during Operation Parakram when his unit was awarded the Army Commander's Appreciation. Let me now request Major General Dr. Bipin Bakshi to kindly make his presentation at this conclave.
Thank you very much for this, Mr. Soham. It's such a pleasure to be here with you in this wonderful interaction which you have been able to set up. So as you've been mentioning, I was the lead for information warfare during Op Parakram handling Kashmir. So the army formation in Northern Command, which is based at Udhampur, they have an appointment called the BGS-IW, which actually means the Brigadier looking after information warfare. So that experience set me on a journey with a lot of interaction on information warfare issues, and subsequently my time in the NSG, where I was again dealing with counterterrorism, and I got more interested in this domain and started my PhD. So I will be interacting with you on this forum, and I would like to share a presentation in which I will give my thoughts on the way we should look at information warfare, the way I feel the nation should be looking at policies to deal with the issue. In the process of my presentation, I will also try and cover what some of the other nations are doing, not all, but to get some pointers. And I will now share my presentation. And as I was mentioning, when I go about to talk about other nations, it is not my point that we need to do something just because another nation is doing it. It is also not my point that we have to copy anyone. We have to have our own response. But we must be aware of what other nations are doing. So that is the basic context of my presentation. So first and foremost, I will talk about the important characteristic of information warfare. I will constantly be using the word information warfare rather than only cyber warfare, because in my studies and my understanding, cyber warfare is a component of information warfare. This has emerged as the fifth domain of warfare, with land, sea, air, and space largely being physical. This is actually a kind of a virtual domain. Technically speaking, if the entire electricity of the planet shuts down, and all servers shut down, and all telephone lines and the fiber optics are cut, this domain collapses. That is not so of the other domains. So this is the fifth domain. The domain itself is transnational by design. Again, unlike the other domains. When you talk about warfare, in the post-World War II era, all the charters, all the laws of armed conflict are made on the basic premise that international laws will kick in only when there is armed conflict. And information warfare attacks are not covered by any of the existing legal provisions. So that is an issue which needs to be looked at. So, let alone information warfare, even an item like terrorism has not been as yet defined in very clear terms in the UN Charter. Information warfare is one of more of those very grey zone issues which have yet to be properly covered by UN charters. Why am I telling you this? Because I'm saying that each nation is standing alone in this fight. Each nation has its own understanding of how to deal with it. And the structures which we have, for example, a couple of months back, our PM's address was there to the UN General Assembly where he says, we cannot fight today's challenges with outdated structures. While his comments were for reform of UN, I am using this comment to state that even in the information warfare domain, we cannot fight the today's challenges with outdated structures. I am not going to what exactly he said. So coming on to the subject per se, I would say the way this domain is being used today is to modify perception. And ultimately, the aim is to influence opinion and modify behavior. It is not just a simple virus or a ransomware business. There is more to it. There is strategic communication, which is an imperative. And therefore, we need to see as to how to fight information warfare, which is riding on cyber media. Very recently, there has been something happening in this space in the courts. And the government itself in September said that the unchecked digital media, which is a serious problem. And a couple of months later, as you're aware, legislation has come where OTT platforms have gone under the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting for regulation, which was not there earlier. So this is a build-up which is happening. Regulation is being modified, the structures are being modified, and we are in a very volatile era in this particular domain. So as the students, as the researchers, as think tanks, we must keep studying this very carefully, and we could probably make some policy recommendations. But is this new? No, information warfare has been practiced as way back as the Arthashastra's time. Dissension in enemy camps, espionage, and the fact that open war is the last recommendation. In fact, if you look at his Rajamandala of Chanakya, this entire game he is playing, how is he playing this game? He's playing it with information warfare. And even his four upayas, Samadana, Bheda, Danda, Danda is the last one. The first three domains he's playing and trying to play in information warfare domain, and so did the Chinese thinkers. It has always been part of the Chinese military strategy. We've heard all these, those people who have been more into the security domain would have heard all this, but the last one I am now unfolding is extremely well known. Subdue the enemy without fighting. And how do you do this? You have to do it with information warfare. So the art has been practiced since long. The medium has changed, is what I'm going to come to. That medium was earlier more of a one-to-one medium. You would write a letter, it would be one-to-one. You make a phone call, it was one-to-one. You had an email message, typically it was one-to-one, no third person could see it. Now we have gone into the SMS and the WhatsApp domain, and now suddenly it has gone one-to-many. Whereas public broadcast moved from smoke signals and drums to print, to radio, and to TV, but even that now is coming onto the mobile. So there's a kind of a convergence happening, and what this sword depicts is that we used to say the pen is mightier than the sword. Now I would say it is the mobile is mightier than the sword. There's been a change in the medium in which this is happening. So is this mobile device used for communication, personal communication? Is it to see news? Is it to express views? Is it to chat? Or is it some of all of this? So this is what has changed the basic domain. What was earlier, as I was saying, one-to-one has now become one-to-many. And what is more critical is at the bottom of the slide, it is unverified bulk transmission, which this small little mobile in the hand is capable of doing. This gives it the capability to influence perceptions, opinions, behavior, voting patterns all across the globe at very low cost. So that is what has been the change. Now to deal with this, just take a look. I have just taken this particular photograph straight from the Twitter page of the US Cyber Command. If you look carefully at this photograph, you will see there are multiple displays being looked at by qualified people who are sitting together in a large hall, and they are not just looking at cyber traffic. They are looking at content. They are analyzing content and seeing what is the reach, what is the impact. So I'm not saying that we need to do this. I'm just saying that each nation has its own response, but we need to know how are other people fighting the battle in the fifth domain, and then we should be better informed about how we must fight this battle in the fifth domain. That is the backdrop of my talk. So I will talk about the components of information warfare. I will talk about challenges to national security, what are the state approaches, own and some others, and the way forward. So first and foremost, about the terms being used, the components of information warfare. I will not spend too much of time on this. The very first book by Edward Waltz in the late 80s used the word information warfare for the first time in USA. The term has been used off and on by various countries. USA themselves went on from information warfare to start calling it information operations. Later on, it has taken the term of strategic communication. Various other components have been talked about. How do all of them correlate? What is cyberspace and what is infospace? While USA still talks of cyberspace, many of the agencies talk of cyberspace. Russia, and to some extent, I would say even China, is looking at information space. The combination of information riding in the cyber domain, and taken as a whole, we should look at strategic communication. Now, this was an old diagram where there were 5 elements being talked about. That is electronic warfare, the computer network operations, military information support operations was just another name for psychological warfare, deception and security. Now, subsequently, the last 2 on the right have been taken as normal military operations part, and we're left with 3. But this segregation which is given here, where information technical is being taken separate from information and influence operations, to my mind is an error. The US Army themselves have realized it, and the Russians have understood it very well, and they have merged the operations. That is, these 3 elements are to be taken together under one umbrella. With that, I come to my idea of the information warfare domain. It has these 3 elements, which I have already described: electronic warfare, psychological operations, and cyber warfare. And anything you are doing to manipulate, influence, disrupt decision making, and influence behavior and voting patterns will be talked about as information warfare. So this is what I have come to with this much of my talk. And here again, I have listed the components. Now, to wage psychological warfare, you have to manipulate perceptions. You have to look at public information, how it is being done. Diplomacy is part of it: public diplomacy, military diplomacy, and normal diplomacy. Cyber warfare, once again, there are elements to it. It cannot be taken as only cyber defense. You cannot sit back and say that I will prevent the attack by sitting within my territory, which is my cyber territory. Increasingly, nations and organizations have begun to realize that you have to reach out beyond your borders. And in fact, in this domain, there are no borders. So you need to go and find out where is the threat originating from, and how far away from my own networks do I have to ride to nip the threat at its bud, or at its origin, or at least close to its origin, at the furthest server where I can reach. Then I can say I have security. So you cannot do it only by defense. You need to have exploitation. You need to have a reconnaissance of the foreign networks, and you have to be able to attack and bring down a server which is going to harm you. That is the overall concept of cyber. Now coming on to electronic warfare, anything in the electronic domain which has radiations, which can be measured, monitored, and looked at is in this domain. And this is a slightly more military domain, I would say. But all kinds of transmissions, whether they are satellite, whether they are radar, whether they are communication, non-communication, are covered in this domain. These are the components. Cyber security and isolation will not enable you to fight this battle. So cyber warfare, again, I will not go into great detail. As I mentioned, that there are three elements of it. Electronic warfare, I will not be able to explain very fully in this time. But this is all the elements which work in the electronic transmission domain. And finally, a combination of them all, what the information environment is. So there are three major dimensions in it within the domain. The ultimate target is on top, that is the cognitive dimension. Now, how you're reaching the decision makers, how you're influencing the public is ultimately the cognitive dimension. To reach there, you have a physical dimension where you have the networks and you have the data dimension or the information dimension. So data being taken away from the nation, data sovereignty, data security, this is all fine. But what I would say is it is not just the data which is being stolen that is so important. It is how a person can manipulate and use that data is what is important. And ultimately, the use of that data which is taken away is to target certain individuals and to influence decisions. So ultimately, you are coming back to the cognitive dimension. Now, how does this challenge national security? National security in the last 20 or 30 years has morphed beyond the simple understanding of interstate military conflict, which it was earlier thought of. There are now today multifarious threats. We talk about comprehensive national security. We talk of so many domains in it. There's economic, political, energy, etc. And in yellow, what I have put, I would say that national security as an important element of national security. And I hope I'll be able to justify what I'm saying in this presentation. So if security, as per the thinkers, is the ability for a state or a society to maintain its functional integrity and be able to carry on its activities despite any hostile forces, then today we cannot have this kind of integrity without information security. And the Russian national security strategy has recognized this. It is the only one which has mentioned information security as part of its national security strategy document. None of the other people have yet done it, but of course they are taking various kinds of steps to ensure information security. The Russians have listed it as a part of their national security strategy, and they've entrusted the Federal Guard with warfare in this domain. I've written an article on this, which came out in the as a clause brief about how information warfare is redefining national security. Now, here is a board taken from our National Defense College, New Delhi, where the comprehensive national security, which I mentioned just a few minutes back, is listed. And again, as I say here, we need to add information security to this, which is what I have written in that article I just mentioned about. So if national security involves the protection of the state against all kinds of threats, then certainly the information warfare threat is there, and we need to look at information security as a critical component of national security. And therefore, we need to have a conceptual change in the understanding of national security. The conventional concepts and a conventional architecture will not be enough to meet it. The information warfare elements today are being dealt very separately in independent watertight compartments. The structures are also generally moving separately. We have not harmonized them. We need to harmonize them. There are so many agencies working in this space that there is cyber jostling, and there are always a possibility of fratricide where people from the same nation could be working at cross purposes. That is what I mean by fratricide. And we have a lack of information warfare publications. So what should be the state approach? So before I come to our own state approach, I will just mention that all kinds of players are working in this domain. Even the Vatican was hacked recently. Non-state actors and the tech giants are also being looked at as to what they are doing in this domain. They are being grilled. What I would say is there's a very thin line between individual privacy and national security. Because something which is targeted at your voting pattern or your economic activity can very easily be morphed and looked at from security point of view. It can be moved into the security domain at a very small click of a mouse. Ultimately, it is modification of your behavior, your policy, your voting, and your understanding. So this is what information warfare is all about. Here's one more snap from the Pentagon. It is a blog post by one of the soldiers. I'm just putting it as a backdrop. What is important is that in their recent strategy of 2018, they have come very clear that they will reach out and disrupt or halt malicious cyber activity as its source. Even though it may not involve armed conflict, they will go out beyond their borders and do it. This is the first time this has happened. In this document, they have recognized that there was a threat from the hostile powers. It's even hinting at what happened in the 16 elections. And this is a very clear message for the first time where an offensive intent in the information domain has been stated. Till this came out, I would say, it was under the radar. It would have been happening under the hood. Nobody ever got out and stated that I am actually fighting in this domain. Now, the gloves are off. They have a cadre of psychological warfare soldiers, the one in khaki who's handing out these material to soldiers in the different uniform who are actually deploying in a particular area. And these are school bags being used to try and give a more moderate message. The arm of that core is the psychological ops branch of service. Here is their signs, their insignia, and I'll tell you what it means also. So they're talking about, they were still dropping leaflets till about 10 years back. Now, of course, they're going in for different technology to convey messages using better technology. Now, as I was mentioning, I'll talk about the signs. So the knight, which is the main sign in their insignia, represents the capability to act obliquely. Black, white, and gray are the kind of operations which they are into: covert, hidden, and overt. So, and they are into all kinds of social media, which when I come to the end of it, I'll talk about the use of social media. Looking at China, if you look at their three warfare strategies, even here, two of them are very clearly in the information domain. The second Bureau, the third department of the CMC, deals with this subject, and only one of their buildings has come out in an intelligence report having 2,000 people in Shanghai who are doing cyber operations. They have also gone in for the militia way. So in the Yonging County, People's Militia Detachment is here. It is being mentioned, where there is a political instructor as well as a military instructor. And together they are engaged in information warfare. What exactly they're doing, I don't have that information. But here is a photograph of the recruitment of some young people into a militia, which ultimately will become an information warfare militia. And of course, they have now the new strategic support force, where network systems have got integrated into a major headquarter. In UK, they're talking in terms of an information maneuver command. The national architecture is being restructured. They are looking from air, land, sea maneuver, which I was earlier mentioning. They're moving into information maneuver, for which they are restructuring, and the 77th Brigade has been restructured. And this was one of their slides of how they're going about it. They're looking at home and away, both the fronts. They're looking at the 3 dimensions I mentioned earlier. Physical, virtual, and cognitive, all 3 have to be looked at in the information warfare or information maneuver, what they're calling. And the final output at the bottom, to understand, to communicate, to persuade, and to protect. I think it's very clear what is happening in the world. And they say whoever wins in the information space will win the battle. Very recently, our External Affairs Minister has published an interesting book, The India Way, The Strategies for an Uncertain World. And in it, he has made a small mention that as we rise in the world order, we have to be very careful in how we visualize our interest, but also how we communicate our interest effectively. So I'd put it to you that this is what is strategic communication, and all the elements of strategic communication must be understood in their totality. Now coming on to what are our structures. So we have a National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center, which you're seeing on the right. It had been put up by the NTRO. Slowly it is going to become independent at a point of time. There's the DG NCIPC, and he's looking after the critical information infrastructure of the country. For all non-critical, there is the certain on the left. Now that comes under the MITI, whereas this, as I said, is under NTRO and under CAPSEC. But many of the uniformed forces, including the services, are not connected in any great way with any of these 2 structures. All these forces are actually independent and they have their own structures. So earlier, as I said, all the 5 verticals mentioned here, the Army, Navy, Air Force, the IDS, and the DRDO were away from it. Now even these have coalesced to some extent. I'll come to that. The MHA also has raised a cyber wing. To coordinate all the activities of various government agencies, there is a National Cyber Coordination Center, which is yet under construction or under formulation. There's also a National Cyber Security Coordinator who sits within the NSC Secretariat. So a lot of coordination happens now. As you can see, as I'm building up the picture as to how the coordination is happening. And what I mentioned earlier, the Defense Cyber Agency has come up. So the first 4, I would say, the 3 services and IDS have coalesced under the Defense Cyber Agency. DRDO and the other non-uniform structures of the MOD have gone under SIRA, which is being run by the DRDO. There is also a Strategic Communication Department coming up in the National Security Council Secretariat. So this is how this will all be coordinated in the future. But that's not the end of it. As I mentioned in the beginning of the lecture, digital content, especially OTT platforms, were not being regulated. And now it is coming under the ambit of the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting as of 12 November, the media report. So these kind of news portals and content providers will now be regulated. So with that, there is now one more bundle has come in to my diagram. That is the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, besides whatever I have already explained. So the patterns are getting more and more interesting, I would say. Besides that, you have electronic media, that is the TV, National Broadcaster Standard Authority, which actually is a little private organization, which is correlated to the MIB. And print media, of course, is under the Press Council of India. So again, slightly different agencies with different laws and different rules of functioning, but they are all working in the information space. So how do we handle all this? So it's an interesting issue. We need to understand that strategic communication, we have to enter into the strategic communication. We have to be alive in the social media, and that is the best defense. We need to exploit social media, is what I'm saying. So coming back to what I was doing, as I mentioned in Parakram, and a little later, 2013-14. 2014 was one of the biggest floods in Kashmir. So I was handling the media outreach at that time, and we reached out into social media as early as that. And we have this lady who is mentioning in her video, this is I'll not play it right now for lack of time. The job the army did for us, my real brother would not do. I'm very grateful to the army for saving me. We were using social media very effectively. And I've written an article also on this particular subject, that how we can use the social media. It came in the IMR. So what is the way forward? The point I'm trying to come to, and I hope I'll be able to explain to you, that no single agency can handle this battle. So it is not as if the army can handle the land border and the air force can handle space and the navy can handle the oceans and we are good. No single agency can do this battle, and the entire nation has to pull together. This is when I was in the NSG, then Minister of State for Home had stated that every peace-loving person has to contribute. So I'll not say that it's a huge bandwagon, but there are certain things we must look at. Are we going to have a war room of this nature? I'm not stating that we have to have a similar war room, but we have to have some system to monitor and block, thereafter feed your own narratives, measure the impacts, and coordinate the agencies working in this field. In fact, the Supreme Court has very recently on 18 November asked, who is looking into this space, please? If you don't have an agency, please make one. This is what they are saying. Why should we be asking private entities like MP-IDSA, etc., when the government should have the authority? If you don't have an authority or a mechanism, please create one. Or we will hand it over to some outside agency. Very recently, the Kerala governor signed an ordinance trying to enforce more powers with the police to police the social media, and within 3 days they had to withdraw this particular ordinance. And it only highlights that there is legislation, there are acts, there are methods by which you can monitor and block or take actions in this space, but there is a lack of understanding of how to apply it. So either we go for new laws as what Kerala has done, or we learn to apply the existing laws better. Within 3 days, as I was saying, this was taken down on public demand. So just to conclude, I would like to see that information security gets the primacy as a part of national security. What are the components we understood and formalized? A national security strategy should be formulated and published. We need to integrate our elements of national power to achieve victory in this battle. How we should do it is to synergize all the organizations which are presently in it, and synergize the cognitive, technical, physical at one level, military, academic, government, and civil industry at another level, and finally the protection, response, and attack elements. If we do not integrate, if we do not modify our training, the way we are structured, the way we train our people, the way we build HR policies, maybe to have career progression in this domain, we will lose. And if we don't fight this battle, we'll be unable to pursue our national interests. So that is my whole point, that we need to have a whole of nation approach to this issue. And with that, I will stop sharing my presentation, and I hope you can see me again. So I have tried to cover my thoughts of the way this battle is to be fought, and the way I perceive that we should modify our structures, modify our systems, and I hope we can formulate some policies to deal better with this domain. I'm not saying we're not doing it. It's a work in progress. So thank you so much for hearing me out.
Thank you so much, Major General Dr. Bakshi, for sharing this very insightful presentation on information and cyber warfare and the various dimensions of it, your own rich experience, as well as the way forward, particularly and very importantly, and the need for synergizing and integrating the various operations and the training, the way things are structured. So, if I may ask you a few questions, particularly One of the questions that we wanted to debate, and since you are here today, I think, how do you look at this policy of banning apps, particularly by the government of India, when it comes to our sort of national security interests in relation to People's Republic of China and certain other countries? How do you see its feasibility, or what is the rationale behind such an action?
The apps which have been designed by a particular agency or country could very often have hidden codes. So while they are meeting a stated purpose, for example, CAN scanner or TikTok, while it is meeting its stated purpose, but if you read very deeply into its code, you don't know as to what kind of data it is surreptitiously sending out to some other agency, maybe cross borders. Now, these apps have been designed to give you convenience. So if as a nation or as an organization, I say that an Indian Army person will not use TikTok. If you want to play with a video, you please do it only with a legally known Adobe video editor. So fine, it's a policy I'm making. And I am making sure that whatever work is done on that particular digital device is being done by an app or a software which is known and which has been analyzed. So the chances of leakage of information to a foreign domain will be less. I'm not saying that even then it is secure. It is still not secure. The issue is that I should be able to give my people or my users the functionality which they desire. And if in so doing, and if to safeguard my security, I need to ban certain apps, I should be completely free to do so. That is my opinion.
Thank you so much for that answer. Also, another question would be, since you talked about, fighting with, we cannot fight with outdated structures. So particularly, there is, and this is a more, a structural question in India when it comes to reforms. There is often sort of a point of controversy when it comes to reforms, when it comes to any change. But there have been some change in the security arena. If we see, the formation of the Chief of Defense Staff and the other changes that have come. So how do you see this, your desire or your policy recommendation for a change of a structure or a restructuring, and even the Supreme Court judgments or the Supreme Court observations? How do you see it actualizing in recent future, in near future?
So yes, the joint structures coming up, the integration of the three services, the setting up of the Defense Cyber Agency, the new regulation coming up, these are all steps in the right direction. But yet, they still are moving verticals in independent directions. The move towards integration is still happening. I would not say it has already happened. And even these new structures, they are trying to integrate, definitely. In fact, within the Army, if you're aware, the Deputy Chief IW has now been set up. So they are pulling in the elements of cyber, public information, and information warfare, whatever were being practiced in different domains within the Army, have now been put under one Deputy Chief. This is an excellent step, but this same thing has not translated at the tri-service level as yet. The Defense Cyber Agency is only that is the cyber agency. At the IDS level, they have not integrated cyber with public information. Neither, for that matter, has it happened even at the National Security Council Secretariat. There too, the information warfare part or the cyber part is under the National Cyber Security Coordinator, whereas the strategic communication part is being dealt by a different department. So integration is happening now. First and foremost, each of these structures is growing. The understanding is improving. The capabilities are being enhanced. And then finally, I do see that they are going to integrate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, for the answer. Also, another question I wanted to ask you, particularly because you are in an administrative position now, that when it comes to recruitment, for cyber purposes, don't you think that this needs some sort of, because every day something new is coming up, we need the fresh minds, we need, people with sort of, one may say, unorthodox skill sets rather than very structured, of when it comes to, when it comes to, say, more conventional armed forces or defense personnel, the discipline and the structured approach that is needed. When it comes to cyber, do you think there is a need for, say, sort of unorthodox recruitment, when you recruit certain people who have, say, do not have, say, very conventional qualifications but have exceptional skills when it comes to these, because we hear often many people, from young people developing new types of apps, etc., which are groundbreaking. So all of these, so how do you think, the recruitment pattern can be changed, and we can give real opportunity to the youth? There are all of these, startup India and all of these, how those activities can be integrated to strengthen our cyber defense.
So that's a very interesting thing. This is the way to go. While we modify, as you were mentioning, we should modify our QR to permit certain people who may not be so physically fit, who may not be so agile and so good at shooting weapons, but we need a certain cadre which can fight this domain more effectively. So as of now, we do not have this kind of a special dispensation for picking up people who are good in this domain. So one is that we do this change. But even if we do that and we pick up these kind of people and make this vertical, they will still not be as good as a kid off the street, as a small little startup who's got an agile mind, who is non-military in nature. So you have to have a mixed kind of structure. It is led by the military, but you bring in academia, you bring in industry, and through the industry outsourced manner, you have a series of young people who can be brought in, and you have an integrated small little thing. It cannot be, as I'm saying, no single agency can fight this battle. You have to have a mixed structure. Now, how we make this mixed structure is a thing to be thought of. It cannot be, it's not so simple. I'm not hearing you. I'm not hearing you.
Yeah. Thank you for your answer. So I think, do you think that public-private partnership, the PPP model, is the way forward in this regard? It can be useful.
Yeah. There are limitations to the public-private partnership in terms of security, non-disclosure agreements. But yes, as I'm saying, not only public-private as an industry with the government, but also academia.
Right.
We need to pull in all three. And of course, the military. Now, the very tricky question in all this is who will take the lead? Will it be a military lead with MOD? Will it be a government lead with MHA? Will it be the National Security Council Secretariat? You can't entrust it to a university. You can't give it to a private industry. Somebody has to take the lead, or you have a mixed structure where you pull in elements of industry, including Facebook, Twitter. They have to have a place in this. They have to be on board. But they are the leaders in this particular space. So you have to have a mixed structure. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you so much. My final question to you would be that since you have my final question to you would be that since you have been associated actively with different major sort of conflict situation, also sort of natural calamities where these skill sets of information warfare and cyber warfare has been utilized. So in near future, what major risks or what major opportunities, what is the future in terms of when you see that the major flashpoints that we see for India, we predict that there may be flashpoints with People's Republic of China or with Pakistan, or in our naval capabilities in towards with China in South China Sea or in Indian Ocean region. So what sort of major challenges do you see that can be handled or that may be fought in the cyber domain?
So very, very wide ambit kind of a question. I don't know. So in the international relations space, the difficult situation which we are today trying to tread is our involvement in the Quad, that is the Quadrilateral Strategic Dialogue. So our increasingly close relationship with USA, that is driving us for the Quad, that is USA, Australia, Japan, and India, and how it affects our erstwhile relationship with countries like Russia. And how do we balance our growing aspirations with our international path which we are taking? So I think this is one of the challenges which we have right now. If you saw in the papers a couple of days back, the Russians have started stating that the Quad will take India away from Russia, which is not desirable. So how do we navigate this very, very difficult international relations space? And how do we put out our narrative as to how our national interests are going to be served by our alliances? I think this is one of the major challenges we are facing, and we have to very fine-tune our narrative in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Major General Dr. Bakshi, for speaking to us and being here. So it was a pleasure to have Major General Dr. Bipin Bakshi, VSM, Deputy Director General of the MP-IDSA, speaking to us on the information security and the cyber security on the first session of the final day of C3D 2020. Thank you so much for being with us here today.